This episode was requested by a listener, John P., on Facebook. Hello to both his sons, Jack and Oliver. If you'd like to request a topic or ask us a question, you can find us on facebook.com/morbidcuriositypodcast, on Twitter @morbidpodcast, and on our website, www.morbidcuriositypodcast.com. The Morbid Curiosity Podcast continues to be sponsored by Audible.com. If you're busy like me, but you still want to read up on all sorts of morbid history or keep up with the latest science fiction and fantasy, Audible is the way to go. There are over 180,000 titles to choose from, and you can listen to these audiobooks on your iPhone, Android, Kindle, or other MP3 players while you work, cook, on your commute, or at the gym. In fact, MCP listeners get a free audiobook download and a 30-day trial by going to audibletrial.com/MCP. If you sign up for the trial, you get a free audiobook that is yours to keep, and the MCP gets the funding it needs to keep bringing morbid history to your ears. I have some recommendations of books you can find on Audible on the subject of today's episode, but I'll get to those later. For now, on with the episode. Humans are fascinated by gore and violence, but even more so the mysterious and unsolved. This interest in disturbing and unpleasant subjects is called morbid curiosity, and it has gripped hundreds of people throughout the ages. I am one of those people. My name is Hallie, and this is the Morbid Curiosity Podcast. What's the first thing that comes to mind when you hear the word rabies? If you're like me, you think of aggressive stray dogs with foam pouring out of their mouths, or the 1957 film Old Yeller. The fact is, not many people really know what rabies looks like these days, because in most first world countries, it's become very rare with only a few deaths per year, thanks to the rabies vaccine. What most people don't know is that it's still a major issue in many parts of the world. Rabies is a virus that causes inflammation of the brain in humans and other mammals. It's spread when an infected creature scratches or bites another creature, human or animal. Saliva from an infected creature can also transmit rabies if the saliva comes into contact with the eyes, mouth, or nose, but this is rare. Early symptoms of infection in humans include fever, headache, and tingling at the site of exposure. As the virus progresses and starts to cause inflammation of the brain and its meninges, signs and symptoms can include slight or partial paralysis, anxiety, insomnia, confusion, agitation, abnormal behavior, paranoia, terror, and hallucinations. Males may also become hypersexual, suffering from involuntary erections and ejaculations. There are periods of lucidity, time when the victim appears to return to their senses. The symptoms then progress into delirium and coma. The infected animal may also experience hydrophobia. Hydrophobia, which in Latin means fear of water, is the historic name for rabies. It refers to a set of symptoms in the later stages of infection in which a person has difficulty swallowing, shows panic when presented with liquids to drink, and cannot quench his or her thirst. Saliva production also increases, which can cause the token symptom of foaming at the mouth. Attempts to drink, or even the intention or suggestion of drinking, may cause excruciatingly painful spasms of the muscles in the throat and larynx. This can be attributed to the fact that the virus multiplies and assimilates in the salivary glands of the infected animal in order to further spread the disease through biting. Hydrophobia is commonly associated with furious rabies, which affects 80% of rabies-infected animals. This is the version of rabies we are all familiar with. The remaining 20% of rabies cases may experience a paralytic form of rabies that is marked by muscle weakness, loss of sensation, and paralysis. This form usually does not include hydrophobia. After contracting the disease, the symptoms start after 1 to 3 months. However, the incubation period can be as short as less than a week or more than a year. The time between infection and when the symptoms begin is dependent on the location of the wound, the site of transmission. The rabies virus is neurotropic, meaning it travels through the peripheral nervous system toward its final destination, the brain and the rest of the central nervous system. During this incubation phase, the virus can't easily be detected within the host, but vaccination may still be an option for treatment. That's why it's important to be vaccinated if you're bitten by a strange dog. Once the virus reaches the brain, it rapidly causes encephalitis, or swelling of the brain, which is the first of the symptoms. Rabies may also inflame the spinal cord, an effect called transverse myelitis. Once the victim starts showing symptoms of rabies, treatment is almost never effective. Survival is rare, even with proper and intensive medical treatment. Nearly always, 2 to 10 days after symptoms begin, the victim dies. Transmission of the virus is usually, but not always, due to a bite from a rabid animal. The virus is usually present in the nerves and saliva and easily transferred through biting, as the infected animal is exceptionally aggressive in most cases and may attack without provocation. This is an example of a viral pathogen modifying the behavior of its host to facilitate its transmission to other hosts by directly affecting the host's decision-making and behavior control mechanisms in the central nervous system. Transmission between humans, however, is rare. The only well-documented case of rabies caused by human-to-human transmission occurred among 8 recipients of transplanted corneas and among 3 recipients of transplanted solid organs. As I said though, this is extremely rare. Bite transmission by infected humans could theoretically transmit rabies, but no such cases have been documented, as infected humans are usually hospitalized and necessary precautions are taken to deter such exposure. Casual contact, such as touching a person with rabies, does not constitute an exposure and does not require post-exposure treatment. However, as the virus is present in sperm and vaginal secretions, it can spread through sexual contact. Any warm-blooded species can be affected with the rabies virus and develop symptoms. The virus has also adapted to grow in the cells of cold-blooded vertebrates. When birds were artificially infected with rabies in 1884, it was discovered that they are almost completely asymptomatic and were able to recover. Some bird species do develop rabies antibodies, a sign of infection, after feeding on rabies-infected animals, but they still do not show the usual symptoms. Most animals that can be infected by the virus can transmit it to humans. Those that present the greatest risk include infected bats, monkeys, raccoons, foxes, skunks, cattle, wolves, coyotes, dogs, mongooses, and cats. Other animals that may spread rabies include bears, domestic farm animals, groundhogs, weasels, and other wild carnivores. Surprisingly, rabbits and hares and small rodents such as mice, rats, and squirrels are almost never found to be infected with rabies and are not known to transmit rabies to humans. In fact, the Virginia opossum is resistant to rabies. Still, if bitten by one of these creatures, it's best to go to your doctor and make sure. Globally, dogs are the most common animal infected by rabies. More than 99% of human rabies cases in countries where dogs commonly have the disease are caused by dog bites. In the Americas, bats are the most common source of rabies infections in humans, and less than 5% of cases are from dogs. The scientific name for rabies is lysovirus, lysa meaning madness in Latin. The disease has been known since around 2000 BP, with the first written record of rabies being in the Mesopotamian cuneiform tablet we call the Codex of Eshnunna, which is dated to around 1930 BP. This document dictates that the owner of a dog that shows symptoms of rabies should take preventative measures against bites. If another person was bitten by a rabid dog and later died, the owner was heavily fined. Although no treatment would exist until the 20th century, rabies was researched by many people throughout ancient history, from Pliny the Elder to Aristotle, Celsus, and Hippocrates. Many of these Greek and Roman researchers described the symptoms and noticed that the disease was likely due to a poison in the foam seen around the mouths of infected dogs. Ineffective folk remedies were plentiful in the medical literature of the ancient world. Antaeus, a physician of ancient Greece, recommended a preparation made from the skull of a hanged man. Scribonius Largus, the court physician to the Roman Emperor Claudius, prescribed a poultice of cloth and hyena skin. It was later discovered that the foam was not the method of contagion. Girolamo Fracastoro, who played a part in the syphilis episode of the MCP, wrote in 1546 that only laceration of the skin by the infected animal could pass on the virus. He was also the first to describe the effects of rabies on humans in detail. Rabies was considered a scourge. In France and Belgium, where the Catholic Saint Hubert was venerated, a metal nail, cross, or cone, called a St. Hubert's key, was heated and applied to cauterize the wound as treatment and prevention. Dogs were branded with the key in hopes of protecting them from rabies. The pathologist John Morgagni stated in 1796 that the virus didn't seem to pass through the blood, but through the nerves. Soon after, in 1804, George Gottfried Zink tried to prove that the infective agent was transmitted through the saliva into open wounds. Morgagni was correct. Finally, in the 20th century, Louis Pasteur, the creator of pasteurization, created a rabies vaccine after many dangerous research experiments on rabid dogs. It is said he and his fellow researchers kept a revolver nearby while they were working, just in case any of them were bitten. They had decided before they started that death was better than suffering through rabies. Today, treatment after exposure to rabies can prevent the disease if administered quickly, generally within 10 days of infection. Thoroughly washing the wound as soon as possible with soap and water for about 5 minutes is effective in reducing the number of viral particles, and then an iodine or alcohol wash is recommended to reduce the virus further. Vaccination would then take care of the rest in most cases. In the United States, the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, or CDC, recommends people receive 1 dose of human rabies immunoglobulin, or HRIG, and 4 doses of the rabies vaccine over a 14-day period after they're exposed. Unfortunately, HRIG is expensive and constitutes most of the cost of post-exposure treatment, ranging as high as several $1,000s. As much HRIG as possible is injected around the bites, and then is also injected deep into the muscles in a place that is far away from the bite wound. People who have previously been vaccinated against rabies don't need the immunoglobulin, only 2 post-exposure vaccinations. The pain and side effects of these modern cell-based vaccines are similar to flu shots. The old nerve tissue-based vaccinations that you may have heard urban legends about required multiple painful injections into the abdomen with a large needle. These still exist and are less expensive, but they are being phased out and replaced by the more affordable World Health Organization intradermal vaccination regime. Even though more than 15 million people get vaccinated after potential exposure each year, the cost remains significant. Rabies is an ancient disease, but it still has a large impact today. Despite the considerable human suffering it causes, it's often neglected, falling between the cracks of public agencies, even though methods of combating it are available. The reason for this is that the methods we have for diagnosing the virus are slow, expensive, and not easily moved to the locations that need them most. Another issue is that public health laboratories are not well funded, making the development of better anti-rabies technology even more difficult. Also, while post-infection treatment is available in places like the United States, the United Kingdom, and Australia, third world countries have only vaccination to keep them safe, and if someone is exposed to rabies, there is little that can be done but let them die. Sedatives are often used to subdue the final agonies of the disease, but the rest of the progression is no different now than what it was in the past. If you'd like to help, there are several organizations you can give to, two of them being Mission Rabies and the Worldwide Veterinary Service. Both these organizations have websites that are easy to find on Google if you're interested in donating. There are several famous historic cases of rabies. One of these was that of Charles Lennox, the 4th Duke of Richmond, Canada. During the summer of 1819, Lennox undertook an extensive tour of Upper and Lower Canada. During his travels, he was bitten on the hand by a fox while trying to break up a fight between his own dog and the fox. The injury healed, and he continued his journey. The first symptoms of hydrophobia appeared weeks later. The disease developed rapidly, and on the 28th of August, he died in extreme agony in a barn a few miles from a settlement that had been named in his honor. In 1849, the poet Edgar Allan Poe went missing from his home in Richmond, Virginia. A week later, he was found lying in a gutter in Baltimore, wearing someone else's clothes and nearly incoherent. He then spent 4 days suffering extreme hallucinations before spiraling into madness and dying. At the time, the cause of his death and the circumstances surrounding it was considered a total mystery. In 1996, Dr. R. Michael Benitez looked over the case, unaware the patient was Poe. He declared it a clear case of rabies. It appears Poe was bitten by a rabid animal and succumbed to the horrifying disease before he could tell anyone. A more recent famous case actually involves a rare survivor of rabies. In 2004, 15-year-old Gianna Geiss was transferred to the care of Milwaukee physician Dr. Rodney Willoughby, who confirmed with the CDC that she indeed had rabies. She had never been vaccinated against the disease. Knowing there was no proven effective treatment, he proposed something unorthodox. As rabies seems to kill the brain faster than it kills the body, he put Gianna into a medically induced coma to give her body a fighting chance to kill the disease on its own. She was also given several drugs to assist in this process, including ketamine, midazolam, ribavirin, and amantadine. To the surprise of all, it worked. After 31 days of isolation and 76 days of hospitalization, Geiss was released from the hospital. Still, no one knows whether it was the coma, the drugs used, or Gianna's innate predisposition to survive that saved her. Either way, Gianna left the hospital with all higher-level brain functions intact, but an inability to walk or balance. This treatment is now called the Milwaukee Protocol and has been used effectively several times since. Rabies in animals, especially dogs, changes the whole personality of the animal. It suppresses fear and heightens aggression, making for an unpredictably violent creature who appears unstoppable to those trying to subdue it. If you think this sounds like a horror movie, it's because this scenario is twisted into the fabric of our very concept of horror. The ancient fear of rabies was almost irrational due to the number of creatures that could transmit it, though dogs were mostly blamed. The absence of any effective treatment added to that fear, so much so that it was not uncommon for a person that was bitten by a dog and merely suspected of being rabid to commit suicide or to be killed by other people. The effects of rabies appeared supernatural, causing human to turn to beast. Because rabies was one of the few diseases whose animal origin was obvious, due to the very visible bite wound, the fear of aggressive animals, especially dogs, wove its way into mythology and folklore all over the world. The myth of Cerberus, the giant three-headed dog that guards the underworld in Greek mythology, may have been inspired by rabies, as the stories describe a poisonous foam that poured from its jaws. Fearsome dog-headed gods or monstrous dogs appear in the mythologies of many cultures, including Egyptian, Greek, Norse, Irish, and Aztec. As you can already guess, werewolf mythology is suspected to have come from the fear of rabies. In modern times, the fear of rabies has not diminished, and the disease and its symptoms, particularly the aggressive, fearless nature of an infected creature, have inspired several works of zombie or similarly themed fiction. Many of these portray rabies as having mutated into a stronger virus that fills humans with murderous rage or uncurable illness, bringing about a devastating, widespread pandemic. My favorite of these are the film 28 Days Later and the book World War Z by Max Brooks. Other films that have added to the fearsome mythos of rabies include stories about infected dogs, such as Old Yeller and Cujo, both of which are based on books of the same titles. Other films that feature a disease or outbreak inspired by rabies include Rabies, Quarantine, and Troll Hunter. Several books over the years have featured characters affected by rabies. One of these is Their Eyes Were Watching God by Zora Neale Hurston. Books in which a rabies-like virus plays a large part include The Totem by David Morrell, Rabies by Borislav Pekic, and of course, World War Z by Max Brooks. These and many others can be found on Audible.com. As I mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, just for MCP listeners, Audible.com is offering a free audiobook download and a 30-day trial. You can download any audiobook from their massive collection to keep for free, whether or not you keep the service, by going to www.audibletrial.com/MCP. You're going to want to keep it though, because there are so many awesome audiobooks on there. The non-fiction book I recommend about rabies is Rabies, A Cultural History of the World's Most Diabolical Virus by Bill Wasek and Monica Murphy. Once again, that's www.audibletrial.com/MCP to get your free 30-day trial and free audiobook. Getting a free trial also supports the MCP, so I highly recommend it. Rabies seems like something out of a horror film, but it's not. It's real. Thanks to pet vaccinations, people rarely contract rabies in first world countries, but the rest of the world is still fighting this terrible disease. Awareness is key in winning this battle, and that awareness is often brought on by our own curiosity. The Morbid Curiosity podcast was produced by H. Lloyd. If you'd like to get in touch or suggest a morbid topic for me to talk about, you can tweet the show @MorbidPodcast or find us on Facebook and Instagram @MorbidCuriosityPodcast. If you like the show, please share us on social media and give us a rating on iTunes. Your shares and ratings help us grow. A big thank you to Socrates, Sil9MXM, Bree987578, Heather Ann, Archeoman, and Krista Lee for giving us a rating on iTunes. Thank you to Lydia P. for retweeting us, and to Forensic Outreach and the Folklore Podcast for recommending us on Twitter. Thank you to Kaz E., Sasha S., and Lucy S. for chatting about the Frances Glessner Lee episode on Facebook. Thanks to you and many others, our creepy community is growing. Speaking of our creepy community, the MCP is part of the Belfry Podcast Network. Check out the other shows on the Belfry Network at www.thebelfry.rip. If you'd like to support the MCP, you can go to our website, www.morbidcuriositypodcast.com. There you'll find a donation button, links to all our social media, and other ways to contact us. Your donations really help us keep the podcast going. We really appreciate your support. My name is Hallie, and until next time, thanks for listening.